And then whenever you're ready, let's do it. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today in the second installment of the 1.8 Community Release Retrospective. My name is Paris. I work at Google. I'm going to be going through the retrospective guide today, if you'd like to follow along. Yesterday, we went through the follow-up from the last retro, which was 1.7. We also did half of the what went well in 1.8. So that's exactly where, no, I'm sorry, we actually went through what could have gone better in 1.8, about halfway through that. So we're going to pick up there where we left off. Last call, is Jordan on the line? I know Jordan has some items on here. If not, I'll go ahead and read his.
So I think, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. Okay, Jordan, we left off right at the better test coverage for upgrade scenarios.
I'm sorry, it seems that our coding doesn't work. Jesus mentioned it in our chat, and I also don't see the icon that mentions that we are currently live.
We want to wait for.
I'm also not sure if Jorge is live streaming on YouTube. Okay.
George, are you live streaming? I think he is. Yep, he's streaming. Yep, we're good. The only thing is I don't have host privileges for anybody that's listening. But anyway, as long as George is streaming, we're good right now.
Right.
But anyway, if Jordan's on, go ahead and make comments about it looks like you've left two, actually, one above or below the test coverage as well.
Yeah, so this was kind of immediately on release, we ran into reports of upgrade scenarios and restart scenarios and just sort of scenarios outside the one E2E test that we had that kind of required some scrambling and some quick action, and we're still kind of working through some of those items. And in some cases, the fixes were doc fixes. In another case, it was a config change. And then we actually have a pending fix that's going to go out in 181. And so some of those could have been caught earlier with just better, broader coverage of end-to-end scenarios. And this is kind of a tricky balance between testing Kubernetes proper and then testing specific deployment tools and mechanisms. And so coordinating with the maintainers of those deployment tools to make sure that kind of upgrade and clean install and reset install scenarios are covered, just because the community uses these deployment tools. And so if Kubernetes 1.8 comes out, but then their deployment tool of choice doesn't handle one of these scenarios well, it really impacts the community.
Thanks, Jordan. And the next one was also you, and that is, hold on one sec, time from release candidate to GA seemed too short.
Yeah, so this was actually something that we were discussing during the release process, but again, there were pretty quick reports of a couple API issues after 1.8.0 was released, and having more time, and I'm not sure what the right amount of time is, but I think we had effectively 3 business days, something like that, between the release candidate and the GA, and so we might want to revisit that and say, do we want to give people like 5 days or a week? Would that have made a difference? And if so, like publicizing the release candidate better and saying, please report issues. This is the last call. You have a few days to report things.
Thanks, Jordan. And then Jace, you're up for the next 2.
Let me unmute here. So these actually, we did cover the non-blocking and the release notes. So,
oh, you did. Yep, yesterday we did.
So
right.
Let's see. So we're down to Eric, yeah.
Yep. Is Eric on the line? Let's see. I'm looking right now. Doesn't look like it. I don't know, Eric. No. All right, I'll go ahead and read Eric's. Eric had one, better documentation of roles, write down who owns what, and then also a better policy on, quote, forever read tests. Does anybody have any comments on either of those?
So documentation of roles is just really not good. Like there's absolutely nothing for the lead. So it's pretty much whatever I can come up with soon to do for that. And thankfully, the branch manager, I think, actually has really good documentation. Although I wish Adam was on the call so he could speak to that. Yeah, so we're going to try and continue that, but it definitely needs a lot of work. So that might be something, if we want to put that as a to-do, I don't know who can actually volunteer for that, but that would be definitely something to put in there. And the forever read tests is, oh my gosh, I wish Aaron was on the call. So these are tests that are sort of flaky from the get and don't ever get better. Yet they're considered important. Sometimes they wind up in blocking status even. So we just need a policy on that, figure out what to do about that.
All right. And the next one, I don't believe Sen's on the line. I just looked for him. Sen, are you on the line? Need to move out of Jenkins for 1.9? All right. Well, looks like someone believes that we need to move out of Jenkins for 1.9. Does anybody have any comments on that? All right. And anyone, release team, Jace? You want to take the next two for need an easier way to determine?
Yeah, so these, so the submit queue status is better. And actually this might not even be as appropriate with the new test grid dashboard for this. So I'd say that maybe this is already either or better / fixed. This came from a long time ago before that was really in place. So upgrade tests and schedule planning. So this was a thing, the schedule planning that we have in place, and actually there's a pull request out there right now for the 1.9 schedule, is you actually need to think about the implications of these upgrade tests and how the fact that the people who are supposed to be working on these in some cases can't. In other cases, requires a lot of input from SIGs that may be busy doing feature work or other work. So basically, it's an unfunded mandate, and that's a big problem for the release process. This is time after time is the thing that causes the most agony. I don't know what to do about it, but we definitely need to consider this as a risk for 1.9 and moving forward.
And then the next one as well for upgrade test and schedule planning needs.
Yeah, that's it. No, we just need to figure that out. I don't know what to do there.
And then you're also the next 5.
Okay. Let's see.
Release burn down meetings.
Oh, okay. Release themes. So release themes is, and this is something that we kind of talked about yesterday, but essentially coming up with the question or answering the question, do release level themes even still, is that a thing? I don't think it is. And I think there may be objectives we have as a project, but I don't think those are what have traditionally been called themes. And I think Ihor also sort of backed my opinion on that. And I'm pretty sure Caleb is also on the same page with that. So this is opinion. Basically, we need to solidify the PM SIG release alignment as soon as possible. So that's essentially for 1.9. We need to get on the same page about this because we're going to run into the same problem again. And it was very uncomfortable having this sort of false start with the press about what are we delivering, and I felt like maybe we didn't give the best impression. Like, it's like, do you guys know what you're doing? It's like, yes, we do. We know what we're doing. It's just we're figuring out messaging. So yeah. So let's see. And via alpha release cadence in schedule is not correct. Yeah, so we totally botched the alpha release cadence because we went into it with the desire to have all green signal for those alphas, and that never happened. So we just cut them anyway, which is what everybody else has done for every release thus far. And we just need to figure out, are we going to do them or are we going to not do them? Does kubeadm still need those to test against, et cetera? I would love to have SIG cluster lifecycle weigh in on the value and importance of those. From a release perspective, those do give us a valuable insight in terms of the Anago infrastructure and can we cut the branch? Does the branch manager have what they need to do as far as permissions to do that and so forth? So there's value in the alphas, but certainly the 2-week cadence on those alphas is not right. Anybody want to talk to that? Because I just like riffed there for a while. There's a lot of other people on this call.
Yeah, just like to second on the items above that we have discussed regarding the issues that we had with, first of all, with the release notes and the release themes. So luckily, our general release process have moved to to much better shape than we had a year ago, for example, when we have established this concept of the release themes. So it would be great if we move forward with that and to some enhanced model that we actually have discussed yesterday, and that actually JC is speaking about it right now. And speaking about release plus SIG-PM alignments, that's also, I don't want to say that we had some problems with this, so I would oppose here. So we were good with our blog post and with our messaging with the press releases to some articles, newspapers, and so on. But that was only the issue of the right messaging that we have to have. So we simply have to start working on that since the day first, but not the end of the release. And that was the primary issue. But I don't want to say that it went bad. So we haven't been pushing any absolutely incorrect messaging. It was we had to adapt it a bit better. That's all. Yeah, that's all from me.
Any other comments? If not, then Jace, you are up next for formalize, review, and revisit the stabilization release versus future feature release.
Oh, there's also the upgrade test ownership is not clear. Upgrade test ownership is not clear. We need to fix that. We need SIGs to clearly own all the aspects of that and to be on deck when that testing cycle starts. SIGs need to be front and center on that, all that. And we need to do a better job as a release team getting people involved in that and providing opportunities to help.
I'm not entirely sure it's just individual SIG's responsibility. It's kind of a tragedy of the commons problem. And I would say that maybe SIG testing should be at least leading the effort in making sure that the infrastructure is in place. Because all the common stuff that people depend on, I mean, anyone SIG, they're not going to do that. They don't have the resources and time and mandate, but nobody does right now. But I'm going to bring that up at the next SIG testing meeting, and hopefully we can try to address that.
So, Maroon, would you prefer that's a to-do then, and you can put your name on it, or is that?
Sure.
Okay, awesome. Okay.
And then at last comments on that. And then, all right, Jace, now it's stabilization release.
Yeah. So this, I took a shot at writing this up, and it was something that Ihor and I had kind of worked on because people were wondering, what is a stabilization release? What is a feature release? And I wrote up a lot. There was a lot of commentary, and there's a link there. But basically, I don't think we ever reached consensus. And it was sort of like, well, I guess the steering committee needs to weigh in on this, because is this really what we're going to do? We're going to do the TikTok model or whatnot. And I feel like maybe having been the lead this time has totally crystallized my opinion on this now, that I think the whole notion of a stabilization versus feature release is not really accurate. I think that we need to be trending toward stabilization as a bulk of the work for every release, and that whatever features we're putting in there should be adding feature depth and less focus on things that are in the ecosystem, or actually more focus on things that they're using extension mechanisms to enrich the ecosystem, and less focus on monkeying around with adding to primitives within the Kubernetes base. So I think that Brian Grant is definitely leading the charge on this already, to say that, you know, what we need is a really good stable nucleus, and basically try and enrich the ecosystem such that all this great stuff that's happening can be independent of the movements and machinations of the core APIs. So, I mean, I think that in retrospect, I almost want to just delete that document and say, you know, that may have been something we needed to worry about 2 releases ago, but I'm not sure that it still applies. Anybody have opinions on that? Because I would love to hear some opinions on that.
I have an opinion. It's kind of uninformed, but from my sort of ignorant sort of perspective on stabilization versus feature, a lot of time there just isn't clear objectives. It's like, this is a stabilization release, we're not going to do new features, but then like what's, like as a project, and even just on the individual SIG level, what are the actual stability problems? What are the problems that are, you know, preventing people from, you know, using Kubernetes in production without operational overhead that's unreasonable, or, you know, bug rates are unreasonable, or whatever. And it seems it's just kind of uncoordinated. It's not like the objective is this and we're going to achieve it. It's just like, it's amorphous. We're going to do stabilization, which means we're just going to do less features and we're going to focus on non-feature work. But I don't know that that necessarily achieves any real goal.
Well, I can comment on that. So what have we done before with the previous releases? And for example, Kubernetes 1.6 in the quarter 1 was the first like officially stabilization release. So we asked all the SIGs to refocus their scope for the next iteration, for the next release, from working on the new features and on the new functionality, but work on the existing features and to enhance the existing functionality. As you know, we have three stages of features. It is alpha, stable, and betas. And we've asked for 1.6 to focus people more on moving alpha features to betas and betas to stable, and not working on alphas for this release. So alphas are absolutely something new, something experimental, and so on. That was our definition of the stabilization release. I can agree that it's totally synthetic, and it can be outdated at the moment because we are moving towards separating core nucleus from everything else, and now the most of the feature work is being done not in the core of Kubernetes but in some external components. So we have to also rework this concept. I'm not sure that we have to completely move away from stabilization versus feature-oriented releases, but we have to enhance these definitions totally.
Yeah, my suggestion wasn't to like, we don't want to focus on stabilization.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more that it would be preferable to have like more visible or more accessible metrics on like what stabilization means, so we can actually move towards that, versus I'm working on a feature that is stable or moving towards it's stable. Well, to me, that's a little bit nebulous, that's all.
Yeah, I agree. Also, when we've been working on feature-oriented releases, but been declaring that this release is not so focused on stabilization as the previous one. We had this situation with 1.7 before. So some people from community and some people from external resources, like from some news websites, have been considering that we are working. So this release of Kubernetes won't be stable at all. And that's also the sample of the bad messaging, and we have to also like refine our wording for the future.
I'd like to comment on this, the issue of things being sort of amorphous. In terms of, I mean, I'm also kind of coming at this from not having been here very long, but it seems to me that if we sort of had a goal ahead of time, that it would be the whole release themes issue would be easier to deal with, but not to make it kind of artificial, but more like the community might be more coordinated in what everybody's trying to achieve, instead of just sort of everybody going around and doing whatever they think is most appropriate in their. I'm not really communicating this well, and I apologize. Basically, I'm not advocating for centralized control or anything, but it just seems like it would be a better thing if the community kind of agreed on what we were all trying to do at any given point, to be able to more easily have a unified voice. That's all I'm trying to say.
I think that's actually fair, and this is part of what I see with my vision of what product management the SIG PM would become in my ideal world would be that SIG PM would be out there gathering real world use cases and really engaging with the operator community and working with SIG Contribex about the contributor experience, and say, what are the things, maybe identify areas where those key enhancements from the user voice could come from. Because, with SIG PM getting really involved in just the low level mechanics of the release, it feels like a missed opportunity, because we're not really out there pounding the pavement, talking to cluster operators to figure out what's new. And I know, because I'm the co-lead of SIG Cluster Ops, that SIG is dying on the vine because we're not getting enough user input into the project. So I feel like a huge opportunity for us here is to enhance our product chops and say, how do we get the net promoter score for Kubernetes? How do we understand what our user base actually needs? How do we synthesize all that information and bring it in as a product voice and get it into the SIGs to work? And that, to me, is, I think, the next frontier of where we need to go, and it really aligns with what you just said. It's like, what are those things that we're missing? If we are in an echo chamber, we're missing those things, and we've got to widen the net and get more voice and find out what those real world problems are.
And Jason, others. So who do you think owns this kind of action item?
I think I own it because I need to write the proposal, and I'm trying to, but I've got four major proposals going right now, and so it's like explode.
I would also add SIG PM and SIG release to the list of the advisors for this. So it's also our area of responsibility, and we have to work on that. Sorry, Nick.
Yeah, no, Nick looks like he was raising his hand to help as well.
I was just gonna say I'll help. I'm not gonna own it, but I'll help.
Help is appreciated. Thank you, Nick. That's great.
All right, now next topic. I don't think I saw Nikhil on the line. Nikhil, last call. All right, I'll go ahead and read Nikhil's. So Nikhil mentioned that verify that features have expected tests before code freeze, especially beta features. We realized later that some features were missing tests, but it was too late by then, a week before release, to turn them off. Probable solution, go through all features a day after the code freeze and turn off features which weren't able to get any tests merge. Any comments on that? Last call. Plus 100 from Jace. All right. Doug also says technically all code changes should have tests, period. All right. And then Anthony, it looks like you're up next with downgrade testing.
Yeah, I don't actually know the story here, but it's just a question more that I had based on an announcement that went out saying something about manual downgrade testing surprised us. So I wanted to see if I can ask somebody who knows what happened there.
Yeah, so Merrick jumped in and said, "So, hey, how's the downgrade test going?" And everybody looked at each other virtually and said, "What downgrade testing?" And so, basically, we had to do it manually, and there were flags that could be passed to the testing suite to actually do the downgrade test. But as you know, you have to spin up all the infrastructure around that to do that and whatnot. So it was kind of a fire drill that we weren't expecting. And as far as I know, there's still no automation around this right now. So we're going to be having the same problem in 1.9. Anybody from the release team want to add to that? Okay. You're muted, Paris.
Thank you. It's so hard to take notes on this. So that definitely wraps up what could have gone better in 1.8. So soft clap on mute. And now we are going to, what can we do differently for 1.9 and beyond? Steve, you have the first couple of issues.
Yeah, these are the three things that I think would really help for documentation in 1.9. First is that we have a single source of truth about which features will need docs. And I think this is the same as saying we need a single source of truth for what the features are. Because as I remember, we had a spreadsheet that listed features, but all the features weren't in that spreadsheet until later in the game. And I think I heard people saying we need to get a single place where we know what features are. And so along the same lines, whatever that place is, that can be this single source of truth about which features need docs. And early in the game, I'd like to have them all marked as either docs yes or docs no, so we have a clear picture up front about which things will need documentation. The next is that I didn't feel like I knew how to communicate what the deadlines were and what we needed. I have these Google groups that I've listed, but if anyone can help me know what other forms of communication I should use to communicate the fact that we have documentation deadlines coming up and what we expect, that would be useful.
One thing to add on to that, Steve, I think having individual owners for each of these features is incredibly useful. I know you were pinging groups like SIG groups and Google groups trying to get people to respond.
Yeah.
Chase, you were doing the same thing, and this sort of like this chase is just it's such a time sink for all of us. So having a single owner of each feature that we can reach out to and get information on, even if they're just doing coordination, would help us out so much.
Yeah, I think, in the spreadsheet, we did have individuals listed for the features that were in the spreadsheet, and I felt a little reluctant to look up emails and send email to individuals, but does that seem okay to people that I would just send individual emails?
Heck yeah. I was all over people. I was on Slack. I was on email. It was like, if I saw him on the street, I would have grabbed him by the arm and said, hey, come on, let's go write some docs.
Well, I would say that the primary place where you can ask people for the docs and for anything else that you require for them is the feature issue. So in the spreadsheet, every feature has a link to the feature issue and the features repo. So that should be the primary place where we're asking people about something. If they don't respond to us, we're moving with Slack, email, grabbing them on the street, and so on.
What about joining this, like the SIG chat for that week? The SIG update. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. The other thing that we could do, we want to do next time is auto-generate the ref pages much earlier. This just sort of slipped my mind, and I ended up asking the few people who knew how to do this to do it at the last minute. So I would like more of us to know how to do it and to do it earlier. Okay, that's it for me.
All right, so then anybody else have any comments for Steve/docs?
Having the single point of truth is also really, really useful to track release notes. So I don't know if that's already been chatted about, but that was huge for us, this release.
We had this practice with the previous release when we had release notes also listed as notes into the same spreadsheet speaking about the feature, and after that we can convert them to GitHub PR. So if you're speaking about that.
Yeah, I think we need to finalize on that. I mean, this is the thing that really gets us, is that at the end of the day, GitHub is really the single source of truth, because if we all got hit by an asteroid, all these spreadsheets and whatnot are gone. If your company that you have your spreadsheets through is gone. Like, for example, all the retro docs I had for 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, so forth were on the Deis drive. And when Deis got bought by Microsoft, that stuff all got retired, and I had to convert it to PDFs and do a bunch of stuff. So whereas GitHub is an enduring source of truth. So we got to figure out how to work best with GitHub. And Caleb is a really strong proponent of this too, and he's sort of he's convinced me that that's probably the right thing to do. But we do need a better workflow around it, because GitHub is not a project management tool; it is a version control system. So
yeah, that's an issue, because we are trying to solve two questions. From one hand, we are trying to solve the question of visualization and easier consumption of some information. And here are Google Docs, Google Spreadsheets, and other sources may help us. But the actual data is stored on GitHub, right? So the actual features data, together with release notes linked to the specific feature, together with all the information about the feature, is stored on GitHub on the features repo. But for the easy visualization, we are moving that information, not moving, but copying that information to the spreadsheet. And we are using that spreadsheet as a primary source of easy visualization and easy consuming of the data. Unfortunately, that process is still not automated. It took us like more than a year to find an appropriate solution, and we still haven't found one. So as this process is completely manual, sometimes some data can be inconsistent and out of sync. So the action item should be how can we automate everything that we have on GitHub and convert to like more visible and more easy to consume form. But again, answering the question, what's the final source of truth, is at GitHub, right? For everything, for features, for docs, for release notes, for code itself, and so on.
I think that's just aspirational. I mean, realistically, GitHub is a terrible solution for doing so much collaboration, and maybe we'll end up, putting stuff there eventually. But Google Docs isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I think we might need to curb this one for a second, because we still have a lot to go and 25 minutes.
Yes.
So, Jace, you have the next 6.
All right, I'll be quick. These are all just blatant opinions, obviously, but I think we should just by policy make the code freeze longer. So I think having it the length that it was worked out really well, and I don't think there was any downside. That may not necessarily be true when things are really bumping, but for right now, I think that we should just plan on things going not well, and if it goes great, then we can let up early. But let's not be aspirational on trying to make it short. That's because there's a lot that happens there. I felt bad for all the people standing up testing for. And Adam put a very interesting little thing there, which is should freeze be enforced instead of being on the honor system? And I say absolutely it should be enforced. The fact that people can just add the milestone to things was a consistent problem and required a lot of oversight by the release team. That was hard. And I'd love to see Maru turn his ray gun of process automation against this problem and solve it.
I think we will have that for 1.9. So there was a Munger update that was released yesterday that enforces SIG approval for any issue in the milestone. And so the next step is going to be requiring, once we're in slush or freeze, that you don't merge things that don't have associated issues that have SIG approval. So we will have that.
Yay.
So who is to grant official SIG approval? Is that still just anyone who can put the label on?
It is anyone who can put the label on, and currently that is a huge list of people that are in the SIG maintainers group, the GitHub group. We can winnow that down or as appropriate, and maybe even limit it to specific SIGs. Currently, it's just a huge list, so anybody who is on that approved list can approve issues for any SIGs.
But
at
it
least
is
there's traceability.
Than all
right
GitHub Kubernetes org members.
It's not any person who can add a comment on GitHub. It is restricted.
Chase?
Okay. Whoa, let's see. I thought I was muted there. Nope. Okay. So align product architecture CNCF release team from day one. Day one has already come and gone. We're not aligned. We all these program level things, all the program level people and SIGs and stuff, we need to be in lockstep around the release, and we're not. So we got to do that. And so add that as a to-do for me. I'm happy to continue that work. Finalized the release team earlier. Hey, look at that. It's a call out for people in the community to join the release team. And right now I'm going to put this in chat. That is a link for people interested in the release team to volunteer to join. So yeah, we need to finalize this ASAP. We took a long time on the 1.8 release to get that filled up, and it was very hard. A lot of stuff lagged as a result. Document the release lead role. I'm going to do that. Try and lower the burden of individual roles. I tried to do that as much as I could. Like, for example, the docs people were struggling with contacting people and also handling the job of the docs. So I jumped in to try and do all the summoning of people to do docs. But frankly, we need more hands on deck to help with some of these individual roles when they get really, really tight. Because Jennifer and Radhika put in literally an all-nighter on docs, and that is not, I don't want to encourage heroism in the community. Heroism is not to our benefit. It's great that people step up and do the things, but we can't be asking people to sacrifice in that way for the community. There are enough people involved and enough people to do the work that we shouldn't be doing that. So I would love for everybody to step up and volunteer and help lighten the load for other people in the release roles.
And Jace, if I can butt in for 1 second,
sure.
For new people that might be on the call, et cetera, what requirements do they need in order to join the release team? Meaning, do they have to be a member already? What are you guys looking for there?
So joining SIG release is good. So anybody can shadow any of the roles. So there's a secondary role pretty much for all the roles. And so the best thing you can do is just to be a secondary. And so for example, Caleb and I could switch off because we're in different time zones. So Caleb would oftentimes do things after hours when I wasn't able to, and so there's just basically a trade-off there. So join SIG release, get yourself on the spreadsheet as a secondary, and go from there.
Right.
Yeah, speaking about the formal requirements, I suppose that the primary person has to be a Kubernetes organization member at least, or like upper in the hierarchy, because some stuff that we have to do requires some GitHub tools that like GitHub instruments and GitHub permissions that you can only have as a Kubernetes organization member. But speaking about your desire, you can be like typical contributor to Kubernetes and simply have some desire to help us.
Yeah, I think the lead role is slightly different. The lead role requires a relatively high exposure to things. So if somebody's interested in knowing what that's about, typically by policy, we ask people to have been in a release cycle before if they're the lead in some capacity. And also the lead from experience, I will tell you, is like managing a very large project with lots and lots of moving pieces. So it requires extremely sharp project management skills. So that's definitely what I would say is a precursor to that.
All right, Jace, do you want to pick up at the start upgrade test work earlier. I think we covered a lot of the roles and responsibilities and things like that already.
Yeah, and there's also the one above that, which is reconsider whether forcing a switch of release participants is a good idea or not. Right now, that is the policy. I think that the spirit of that was like, we don't want people like putting all this stuff in their heads and not, sharing with the community. But my personal feeling doing this is that it's something that if you do it the second time, you're gonna correct a lot of the things that you did wrong or that you didn't know. And it's really disruptive in some ways to try and hand this off to somebody and tell them, hey, here's all the 7,000 things you got to know. And then you're probably forgetting 6,000 of those things. So that's hard. And I'd love for somebody else's opinion on that.
I think having continuity is super important. I think as much as like making sure that we just don't have all the knowledge in, a limited set of people's heads, that's part of it. The other part though is avoiding burnout. It's like, I can do the job. Nobody else wants to do the job. And so it kind of enforces turnover. But in terms of maintaining continuity, the whole idea behind having like secondaries was to have, or shadows was to try to have some continuity by allowing people to work together and sort of gain that knowledge on the job, but where they're not totally responsible. And I think that pattern, I'm not sure that's really played out. I mean, I was the shadow for 1.7 with the intent of leading for 1.8, and for personal reasons, I couldn't do that. But even then, it was actually hard. I mean, Don certainly tried to give me a lot of responsibility, but it's like, as a release manager today, you end up having to just you're the locus for everything. And it's really hard for anybody else to step in and be that. And I don't know. I guess my point is, I think there needs to be a better culture of sharing responsibility and sort of delegating. And as far as I can tell, that's just it's proven difficult. I'm interested in, if there's ways we could encourage that better.
Yeah, I agree. I was lucky because Caleb is a veteran of many releases. So when I needed something done, I basically could say, Caleb, can you mind the fort while I'm gone? And he just stepped up and did it. I mean, but that's rare. I mean, and burnout is real. I mean, I'll tell you, after the release, I literally had 2 days where I could basically do nothing. I was just like a zombie. I've recovered now, although it might not appear so. But it is a lot. It's a lot.
I think that the hope was that like this SIG release would provide at least some of the continuity. I don't know. I'd be interested in your thoughts on how effective that was, Jace.
I think SIG release as a whole is helping that, but I do believe that we have this core of people that is sort of deep in the trenches, and it's hard to. We want to have more people with us, but it's hard, and it takes multiple releases to do that. Like, for example, Jennifer wasn't even really going to be a primary in this, and she wound up getting drafted into a tremendous amount of work. And now she's like, I want to do the next one because of everything I learned the last time. It's like, I understand. I mean, if I was the lead for 1.9, I would do so many things differently, because I wasted a lot of time creating spreadsheets and tracking this, and hey, let's do a Kanban. And it's like, none of that really mattered. The stuff that really mattered was a bunch of stuff I wouldn't think that mattered. So now it's hard to know what to do and how to get SIG release more filled out. So I don't know. We're running out of time, but I think this is something that we should take up in the next SIG release meeting for sure.
I'm honestly not sure SIG release's mandate should be like continuity so much as enabling, like making it easier to, I mean, because I think of like the release team, a lot of it is just, it's relationships, it's knowing people, it's communicating with people. SIG release can't really help with that. It's just an interpersonal thing. Where I think SIG release can make an impact is in formalizing process or implementing automation to allow the release team to focus more on the interpersonal stuff, more on the facilitation stuff, and less on the manual, just all the busy work that really, that's what robots are for.
Yeah,
like
that's actually a good
issue
point.
munchbot? Is that the sort of thing you're suggesting?
I mean, that's part of it, but I mean, I think we could go a lot further. And like some of it is like maybe SIG release should be responsible for, making sure that we have like leadership around upgrade testing or other kinds of testing. Like there's all kinds of things that are like long-term coordination that don't necessarily, like we definitely don't want to do it at the end of the release. We want it to be an ongoing thing that is constantly maintained, and someone's always on top of it. And the challenge with release is a lot of it is like, once code slusher freeze hits, it's like then the real work begins. And the ideal would be SIG release makes sure that a lot of that work is done up front.
Yeah, I guess one question I have there then is, I think what you're talking, some of the stuff is like project health, like the tests, and then is SIG release then responsible for the health of the project in aggregate?
Maybe, I mean, yeah, maybe just big picture stuff around like getting a quality release out. Yeah. I mean, it's just the tragedy of the common stuff, the stuff that nobody else cares about. So the release teams ends up doing, and they're so busy doing other things that they can't possibly do a lot of these tasks justice.
All right. Just for the sake of time, we need to sidebar that combo. And Jace, did you want to finish the rest about delegating release notes? Or
Yeah.
do you... Okay.
I would love to see SIGs start from the very beginning of every release, adding to their release notes what they intend to accomplish. What is the committed work for the release cycle? And then if they don't make those, then somebody's on point to go in, at the end of when code freeze happens, pull them out, and not have this fire drill at the end of the release. If SIGs don't know what they're committing to until way late in the release, that's a problem. And that indicates a lack of planning and other things around the management of those things that could indicate other problems like missing tests or maybe not the maturity of code exposure and soak tests and all that stuff. I want to see these things in the release notes like right out of the gate. I think there's no reason why we couldn't have a solid release notes draft literally the first or second week of the release.
Just a point, a little bit of a divergence. As we devolve things away from Kubernetes, this is going to get a lot more difficult.
Yep.
Yeah. One thing we do have there is you can do queries across repos for issues. So if we're using labeling across all of our repos, it might provide a mechanism to help us.
I'm more concerned with the fact that you're just going to have a divergence in people's work strategies and communication and all kinds of things. It's just going to change the game a bit.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, and I think Jennifer's not here. So the next ones, do you want to read those?
Yep. Or does anybody from Docs want to take those? Okay, I'll read. So Jennifer had a few. The first one is writer engagement and release notes work from day one. Comments?
Yes.
Yes, you have a comment?
No, just yes to that.
Also, continue to develop release notes templates, provide guidance and training in using them. And then also release notes at SIG level, individual files merged into larger final file and managed there by writers.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good thing to do. The rebase necessary to constantly deal with a single doc being updated all of these by the SIGs is a pain.
Yeah, I agree with the last point. We also have to involve some people who are working on the writing documentation and so on to review release notes as well, together with PM work, together with marketing work, and so on. So we have to receive the final version of the release notes before we'll push them to the actual change log.
Yeah, there's a couple pieces of this that Jennifer and the rest of SIG docs have been chatting about. And part of it's training people who are submitting features to give us higher quality release notes, so we don't have to do a lot of churn with them. And then the other part is sort of hammering down a set process for getting release notes, getting them in, having them merged, so that we don't have this churn on the merge side of things. We've kicked around some ideas of different tools that we can use to do this, and different processes. It's going to be some combination thereof. So.
And something else I heard both Jennifer and Radhika express a lot was that they would like to see the release notes in separate files, so that the release notes for 1.8 would have their own file, and the release notes for 1.9. I think they felt a little discouraged that the work they had done was in a big file that had a lot of other things in it, and they felt like that made it less visible.
We need to do that. That's just not something we can't do.
All right, and Jace, your last one, radiate deadlines better.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like I did a pretty darn good job at this, but I feel like I could have done better. We just need to be on top of all these deadlines constantly, and let people understand why we have the deadline, what it means to the project if it doesn't get met. Because basically, I mean, this is probably a gross overgeneralization, but I'll do it anyway. I would say that probably 50% of the work came in after any given deadline. That's not great. So we need to do better.
Well, it doesn't seem like there are actually any consequences for missing deadlines. Therefore, nobody cares. I mean, I hate putting it that bluntly, but like, we stated this before. There really aren't, like, do we actually gate features if they don't get in under deadline? No. So as an engineer, it's like it's more of a suggestion than an actual deadline.
Yeah. Yes.
We need more munch bots. Mario, cook up some more munch bots.
If there's no consequences, then you really don't.
Yeah. And what kind of consequence are we talking about?
I leave that up to the people here, but it's at some point you have to say, if you didn't get it in by this time, your feature doesn't get launched. I mean, that's a pretty typical thing at Google. If you don't have tests, it doesn't go out the door. If you don't have docs, it doesn't go out the door. Like, it's like, that is not unreasonable, I think, but we have to make that explicit and clear to people that there are consequences for not getting your features completed on time.
So maybe, I mean, obviously this requires further discussion, but my suggestion would be there needs to be kind of like a soft deadline that basically replicates what we have today, and then a hard deadline shortly after, but with enough of a lead time to evaluate whether things are actually done. If they're not, then they don't get included. You don't get a chance to do more work. Because right now it's kind of like there's a deadline, but there's no process to evaluate what's been done or not done. It's just keep working until it's done.
But the problem is, and this is again the tautology of open source Kubernetes, is that what gets done is what gets done. So as long as people are merging to master, it's like, what are you going to do? Go revert all the commits? It's like, it just is. It's.
Well, who's approving them and merging them? I mean, at a certain point when it comes to like we were still getting features, and there was debates over whether or not features needed docs up through the launch. And even after the launch, we discovered that there were features that went out that claimed that they didn't need docs, that needed docs. And that's not good. I don't feel good about that. So the SIGDocs team doesn't feel good about that. But that's like, the process that we have forces us to live with that consequence. And I don't really have any leverage to tell people that.
I mean, maybe it requires an architectural change where new features have flags that will enable them. And so it's like, you can do all the work, and if you don't actually follow through with docs or whatever, then your feature does not get enabled.
We had a proposal with the feature branches.
Yeah, I think Brian is working on something like that, but
yeah, and it's currently in an experimental stage for CGAPs and for some differences, as far as I remember, for the upcoming releases.
So who should take this type of activity on, or this action item?
I think it's being addressed in various places already. It's just we need to keep our eye on it. So
Steering committee.
it's probably architecture and yeah, somewhat the steering committee.
Is Aaron on the line?
No.
Anybody testing? Okay. All right. Well, we are wrapping up then. The last items are from Aaron, so I'll go ahead and read those. And looks like he actually has some links on there as well if you're following on the doc. But SIG testing will be working on metrics and alerting as part of 1.9 to provide faster signal that test infra is misbehaving or jobs are failing. Also, SIG testing is going to be replacing Munch GitHub submit queue Munger with Prowl's Tide plugin to provide faster and simpler merging across multiple repos and branching. And then also SIG testing is converting Munch GitHub Mungers to Prowl plugins like release notes.
And for people who aren't initiated, Prowl will just be more reliable and easier to maintain. So that'll allow the SIG testing and testing for people to do more than they're currently doing. Munch GitHub is kind of like an albatross at this point.
Thanks. Any other comments?
Also our another goal is trying to get rid of Jenkins in Q4. So at least make our pre-submit run on Prowl, because we hit a series of Jenkins issues right during the release, and that paused the submit queue for a while.
All right. Last call on the testing items. Jace actually just slid one on there.
It's just like the release. I put it in at the last second. No, so I've been working with the testing crew at Google, and we come up with a proposal I wrote up that's basically going to hopefully put a status page up for testing infra, so we know that things are being worked, because essentially the strategy right now is just everybody hits /retest over and over again and floods the testing infra. So we're going to try and provide a thing where, you know, with if your test doesn't pass and you're looking at your PR, you can click on status.kitsio or whatever, and it'll say, oh yeah, well, the submit queue is currently having trouble with this test. It's being worked by so-and-so, and you know, ETA is like 2 hours or 4 hours to fix that, or whatever that is. Those are all the variables in there will be subbed out, but essentially we will provide some easy way for contributors to know what the status of the testing queue is at any given moment.
All right. Well, with 1 minute left, just a quick thank you one more time to the 1.8 release team. So everybody clap without mute. Thanks to Jace for being an awesome release lead. And that so concludes our retrospective. If you have action items, please follow up. And otherwise, we will see you on the next community meeting next week, Thursday at 10 o'clock.
Thanks,
awesome.
everybody.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay.
Goodbye.